Chapter 1, Introduction, The Two Faces of an Evil Charisma Chrollo Lucifer. When you hear that name, what image comes to mind? Is it the figure standing at the absolute apex of the Phantom Troop, a cold-blooded band of thieves that strikes terror into the hearts of the global underworld and even the most skilled hunters? Jet black, slicked back hair. A cross tattoo deeply etched into his forehead. Donning a heavy, fur-collared coat, he remains eerily calm, silently reading a book even in the midst of a gruesome scene where rain of blood falls. When he acts as the leader, there seems to be not a single ripple of emotion, nor a shred of sympathy for his victims. Only the cold intellect to achieve his goals and an unfathomable madness dominate his surroundings, manifesting as an overwhelming charisma. However, the side of him we sometimes glimpse might bring about an intense sense of incongruity. Think back to his infiltration of the underground auction. With his bangs carelessly swept down and a bandana wrapped around his head to hide the cross. Dressed in a simple shirt, the man who appeared before Neon Nostrade looked, for all intents and purposes, like an ordinary, somewhat melancholic, and charming young man. His words were soft, his demeanor gentle. He listened earnestly to her trivial talk of fortune-telling, occasionally even showing empathy. In that moment, there was not the slightest trace of the ruthless leader who had mercilessly taken hundreds of lives. Two behaviors that are far too extreme, far too contrasting. Faced with this massive gap between Chrollo the leader and Chrollo with the bandana, a certain question naturally begins to surface. Could it be that the mind of the man named Chrollo Lucifer is fractured? Perhaps it is only natural to wonder. It is difficult to easily accept the fact that a human being capable of carrying out such brutal acts with complete indifference can, at the same time, possess such rich humanity and emotional depth. To reconcile these two contradictory elements, the cold-blooded killer and the kind-hearted youth within the same person, it seems far more logical to interpret that multiple personalities exist within him, switching subconsciously. But is that truly the case? Is his mind really as fragile and splintered as one might imagine? Perhaps he maintains a single heart with an incredibly terrifying resilience. Let us peer into the abyss of his words and actions, exploring the highly realistic, and therefore profoundly human, state of mind he may have chosen in order to survive in an abnormal world. Chapter 2, The Discomfort with the Multiple Personality Theory and the Seamless Boundary. If we assume his mind is fractured, several lingering inconsistencies remain impossible to ignore. The first inconsistency is the apparent absence of any personality switch or memory gap. Generally, when personalities switch, there is a clear trigger, and memories are often unshared between the alters, or their emotions and morals are completely disconnected. Yet, we do not see this in him. Between his face as the leader and his face as the young man in the bandana, there is no clear boundary or rupture. They seem to connect far too smoothly, almost seamlessly. The scene that most strongly suggests this is his encounter with Neon Nostrade. At this time, Chrollo was wearing a bandana, his bangs down. Toward the mafia daughter, he acts as a harmless, slightly sorrowful young man. Chatting quietly in a cafe, he looks nothing like the head of a thieving troupe. If, at this moment, an innocent youth personality had truly taken over, what would be happening inside his head? The reality seems slightly different. While perfectly playing the role of a kind young man, internally, he was pushing forward a highly calculating, cold-blooded process, clearing the conditions to steal her ability. Outwardly acting as just a young man, while simultaneously and flawlessly processing his ruthless mission as the Phantom Troop's leader in his mind. There appears to be no dissociation of personality there. Rather, it might simply be a single, cold intellect optimizing its behavior to achieve a goal. And within this exchange, there is a scene we must never overlook. The moment he reads the prophecy and quietly sheds a tear. Reflecting on the sorrow of losing Uvagin and the sheer weight of a fallen comrade, tears spilled from his eyes. If the man at that moment was a harmless alternate personality separated from the leader, why would he harbor such deep, raw sorrow for the death of a Phantom Troop member? Those tears could only fall because he truly, from the bottom of his heart, loves the comrades he has walked alongside since their days in Meteor City. The memories of commanding ruthless massacres, the fierce grief of losing a friend, and the cunning required to manipulate a target. It seems all of these coexist, without division, in a state of contradiction within the single human vessel known as Chrollo Lucifer. His mind is not broken, rather, It may be integrated as a single core, maintaining abnormal strength under extreme tension. Because of this, it becomes impossible to find a clear dividing line within him, drawing us deeper into his unfathomable charm, leaving us wondering, where does the true self end, and the act begin? Chapter 3, What the Tattoo and Coat Mean, a visual switch as a stage costume if his personality is not split, and he is constantly in a continuous mental state. What could that extreme change in appearance possibly mean? The slicked back hair, the exposed cross tattoo, the heavy coat, and the relaxed posture, the bangs down, the bandana hiding his forehead, the casual shirt. Faced with this dramatic visual shift, one might be tempted to look for complex reasons, such as some unique restriction or a psychological defense mechanism. However, if we assume his mental structure is as highly rational and grounded as it seems, the answer might be much simpler, and in a way, very human. Could it be that, for him, exposing that cross tattoo and wearing that heavy coat is merely the act of putting on a stage costume? Think of everyday people. We wake up in the morning, change our clothes, groom ourselves, and leave the house. In that moment, we unconsciously switch from our personal face to our social role. And at night, when we return home and change into loungewear, we can finally revert to our true selves and take a deep breath. What he is doing might essentially be the exact same thing. However, the role he bears is impossibly cruel. Carrying the weight of Meteor City, the world's dumping ground, uniting thieves with overwhelmingly strong individualities, and commanding cold-blooded plunder while turning the entire world into an enemy. To bear that staggering pressure and responsibility continuously as a single, flesh and blood individual would be a monumental task for anyone's sanity. Eventually, the mind would wear down, risking being swallowed by madness. Perhaps that is exactly why he intentionally switches his appearance, to perform the highly specialized and brutal role of the leader of the Phantom Troop. The inverted cross on his forehead is the absolute symbol of him being the head of the spider. That slicked back hair might be his preparation to kill his personal emotions and operate the organization coldly. That heavy coat could be viewed as his combat uniform, designed to project intimidation toward enemies and the charisma needed to bind his numbers. When he is in that form, he may be making himself function entirely as a part of the organization, allowing no room for personal conflict. Then, what about the bandana? Why does he go out of his way to lower his bangs and hide his forehead with cloth? It might be because that symbol of the cross is far too heavy a burden to bear at all times. Physically hiding that cross. Perhaps this is an incredibly vital ritual for him to step down from the grueling stage of the leader and temporarily retreat backstage. By concealing the symbol of the spider's head, he can briefly revert to being just a young man who loves books. Only when he is in that casual form does he not need to maintain his terrifying majesty. It is not his personality that changes, he is simply taking off and putting on his social role. By using clothing as a visual switch, he seems to be meticulously controlling himself to prevent his mind from shattering. Leading a group of madmen, yet never letting madness itself take control. This switching of on and off through appearance might just be his ultimate survival strategy to preserve his sanity in the most extreme of environments. Chapter 4, The Straightforward Question and the Phantom Troop as a system. Chrollo uses a visual switch to divide his public and private selves. Just how deeply rooted is this absolute separation in his psyche? This might be most clearly demonstrated during the tense dialogue scene when he was captured in the chaos of a blackout. In a desperate situation, a question filled with anger and hatred was hurled at him. How can you kill people who have nothing to do with you? It was an entirely natural question, born from a pure, straightforward sense of morality. Yet, his reaction to these words was slightly different from what one might expect. He did not fly into a rage, nor did he use sophistry to justify himself. He simply stared into the void for a moment and pondered deeply. Because they have nothing to do with me, I suppose. Putting motives into words. I don't really like doing it. But surprisingly. Or perhaps I should say, as expected. The key to understanding myself lies there. Faced with a blade of hatred directed right at him, how could he let slip such a detached monologue, as if he were talking about a stranger? The answer might be that he operates the organization known as the Phantom Troop not as an aggregate of personal grudges or desires, but as a single, cold system. Meteor City, abandoned by the world. To resist the cruel rules and absurdity of that environment, the system known as the spider was created. Making decisions as its top authority is, to him, purely work. It seems that personal emotions, or human connections with the victims, simply do not factor into it. The straightforward question was predicated on human emotion and morality. However, because Chrollo was functioning as a part of the leader system at that moment, the premise of the question did not align with his state of mind. That might be exactly why, even in that incredibly tense situation, he began a self-analysis. Why is it that when I am operating as the organization, my emotions do not move? The head of the organization is merely a command tower. The rules he himself speaks of further reinforce the idea that the troop is a system. He seems to view even his own life objectively, as just one cog in the machine of the organization, completely separating it from his personal self. I can process it because it has nothing to do with me. At first glance, this looks like a completely cold-blooded thought process, but perhaps it could also be described as a form of extreme professionalism under dire circumstances. To keep the system of madness running normally without letting emotion interfere, he intentionally sets his humanity aside and acts as a program. This terrifying capacity for objective detachment might be the greatest proof that he is not mad, but rather, controlling his madness through his own sheer will. Chapter 5, The Tightrope of Public and Private, Chrollo as an adult and the charisma born of extreme reason. If he coldly operates the organization as a system, and functions as a part of it himself, what would happen if he were completely swallowed by that role, becoming nothing more than a cold-blooded killing machine? The human being who once purely desired things alongside his comrades in the junkyard would be lost, and the very meaning behind the organization's existence would change into a hollow apparatus of violence. Perhaps that is precisely why he occasionally needs the time to wrap a bandana around his head, read a book, and return to being a single young man. The face of a cold leader, and the face of a human who loves his comrades. He seems to walk a tightrope between these two contradictory realms, leaning toward neither, maintaining balance in an extreme mental state. This is not a subconscious escape, but a self-control executed through his own will and unyielding mental fortitude. And perhaps, this is what it truly means to be a mature adult. The moment this tightrope walk between public and private merged in the most beautiful, yet cruelest form. Was that not the requiem for Yuvagin, echoing through the night sky? The roof of a skyscraper. He stood there in his formal attire, his cross tattoo exposed, wearing his heavy coat. And as the gruesome scene unfolded below, he looked down upon it gracefully, yet with unmistakable sorrow. Ooh-ho, can you hear this? This is a requiem from us to you. In that moment, it felt as though the organizational work of revenge and plunder and the emotion of a youth mourning an irreplaceable friend were perfectly unified within him. The elements he usually keeps intentionally separate overlapped into one in the face of an immense loss. Without breaking his facade as a cold system, while orchestrating a horrific massacre, raw love and sorrow for his friend swirled in his chest. The reason that scene leaves such a striking impression is perhaps because cruelty and beauty, madness and sanity, coexist within one man in a miraculous balance. Chrollo Silfer may have never retreated into the safe zone of psychological abnormality. He carries all his sins with a single, flesh and blood heart, continuing to walk the razor-thin thread that separates madness from sanity. The emptiness of viewing his own life as merely part of a system, existing simultaneously with a deep, visceral love for the comrades he grew up with. Because he traps these incompatible emotions within a single vessel through formidable rationality, his words carry an unfathomable weight, endlessly captivating those around him. The extreme reason that continues to control a burden far too heavy through sheer will. Perhaps that is the true identity of the bottomless charisma emitted by the man named Chrollo Silfer.